All right, let's talk about one of the biggest ideas in all of finance, the myth of the rational market.
So think about it. We're always told that markets are these super rational, efficient things, right? That prices perfectly reflect all the information out there. But if that's really true, then why do they keep going absolutely nuts? I'm talking about the sudden crashes, the crazy bubbles, the moments that just feel like pure chaos. That's the conflict we're digging into today. This beautiful, elegant theory versus the messy, complicated reality.
Okay, so first things first, let's actually get our heads around the theory itself. This isn't just some random idea. It's been a powerhouse in finance for decades. I mean, this is basically the bedrock of what we call modern finance.
And at the heart of it all is something called the efficient market hypothesis, or EMH for short. The core idea is actually pretty straightforward. It basically says the market is just so good at processing information that prices adjust instantly to any new data. What does that actually mean? Well, it means there are no secret deals, no hidden bargains, no obviously overpriced stocks. And the big takeaway is that it should be impossible for anyone to consistently, beat the market.
So if you live in this EMH world, everything is, well, it's pretty neat and tidy. Prices only move when something unexpected happens. And since news is, by definition unpredictable, prices just kind of wander around randomly, what they call a random walk. Now, here's the really crucial part. This theory suggests that risk is something you can actually measure. You can put a number on it, you can manage it, all because the market is supposed to be this incredibly efficient machine. And you know what? This isn't some new-fangled idea. Not at all. We're talking roots that go back over a century. A French mathematician, Louis Bachelier, he kind of laid the groundwork for all of this way back in 1900. He was the one who proposed that markets are like these forward-looking machines, just constantly soaking up all the information. And for a really long time, this was the view. It was dominant, and frankly, it was pretty comforting. But then reality decided to show up. And it wasn't just a polite knock on the door. It was more like a wrecking ball smashing through the wall. Yeah, that orderly, predictable world of the theory, it was about to come face to face with its ultimate challenge, the black swan. So what is a black swan? Well, it's a term that was really made famous by Nassim Taleb, and it's an event that hits you out of absolutely nowhere. It comes as a complete surprise, it has a massive, massive impact, and then, and this is the funny part, after it happens, everyone looks back and tries to explain it like it was obvious all along. It's basically the thing the models say is impossible, right up until the moment it happens. Let's go back in time for a second. Picture it, October 19th, 1987. It's known as Black Monday. The market's open, traders are at their desks, everything seems totally normal. Just another day at the office. But underneath all that, something was going terribly, terribly wrong. By the time the closing bell rang, the S&P 500 had dropped almost 23% in a single day. I mean, let's be clear, this wasn't some little dip or a minor correction. This was a catastrophic collapse. And the craziest part? There was no huge news event that day to explain it. It just happened. Now, this is where it gets really wild. Statistically, the sheer impossibility of what happened is just mind-boggling. This crash was calculated as an 18 sigma event. To put that in perspective, in the language of statistics, that's not just rare, it's so far off the charts, it might as well be impossible. The models, the ones built on that whole EMH idea, they basically said a day like this should never happen, not in the entire lifespan of the universe. And yet, it did. So, the big question is, why? Why did the theory fail so spectacularly? To get to the bottom of that, we have to dig a little deeper into how these models think about risk. And to do that, we need to talk about two really important concepts: signal and noise. Okay, so the traditional models, they imagine risk fits into this perfect, clean bell curve. They call it a thin tail distribution. And in that neat little world, crazy extreme events are practically impossible. But here's the thing. Reality, as the mathematician Benoit Mendelbrot pointed out, looks a whole lot different. It's more like a fat tail distribution. And what that means is that those wild, quote-unquote, impossible swings, they actually happen way more often than the models want to admit. And that makes something like standard deviation a really, really poor and misleading way to measure the actual risk you're facing. There's actually a more intuitive way to think about all this. It's called the signal-to-noise ratio. So the signal, that's the real, meaningful pattern you're looking for. The thing that might actually be predictable. And then there's the noise. That's everything else. all the random, chaotic, meaningless static of the market. And whether you succeed or fail really just comes down to how strong that signal is compared to all that noise.
And here's a great analogy for it. In trading, trying to find a real edge, it's like trying to hear a whisper in the middle of a hurricane. The signal, that little bit of actual insight you might have, that's the whisper. And the market? It's the hurricane of noise. And most of the time, that hurricane is just so loud, you have no chance of hearing that whisper.
So just how loud is that hurricane? Well, for something like the S&P 500, the daily signal-to-noise ratio is estimated to be around 1 to 30. Think about that. For every one tiny part of a potential signal, you've got 30 parts of pure random noise. It's an environment that is just absolutely dominated by chaos. And this leads to a massive problem in finance called overfitting. It's what happens when you're digging through all that noise. You build a trading model that looks absolutely perfect when you test it on past data, but you haven't really found a genuine signal. No, what you've probably done is just found a way to perfectly explain the past randomness. You fit the noise. And guess what? That exact pattern of noise is never, ever going to happen again.
Okay, so if the old way of thinking is broken, what's the alternative? Well, this brings us right back to Benoit Mandelbrot. He came up with a pretty radical new way to see the markets, not as some gentle, random walk, but through the wild and beautiful lens of fractals.
And the difference between the two views is it's night and day. The old orthodox theory says that prices glide, they move smoothly, they're well-behaved. But Mandelbrot, he argued that prices jump. They're choppy, they're wild. From his point of view, these huge swings aren't some weird exception to the rule. No, they are a fundamental part of how markets work. You see this same kind of turbulence and wildness at every single scale, whether you're looking at charts minute by minute or decade by decade.
And here's the real kicker. You might think this is just some outsider taking shots at the establishment, but it's not. Eugene Fama, the guy who is basically the father of the efficient market hypothesis, he admitted this himself, all the way back in 1965. He wrote that real market returns have fat tails. He acknowledged that these crazy extreme events happen way more often than his own model could ever predict.
All right, so the theory has some major cracks in it. The markets are way, way wilder than the textbooks tell us. So what? What are we supposed to do with that information? How do you actually navigate a world that's this turbulent?
Well, the new framework isn't really a new set of rules. It's more about a shift in your mindset. First, you have to truly, deeply acknowledge the risk. You have to understand that those impossible days aren't just possible, they're basically inevitable. Second, you have to question everything. Never just blindly trust a model. Always ask, what are the assumptions here? And third, you've got to be flexible. The market does not care about your beautifully crafted predictions. Sticking to a strategy that isn't working, that's just a recipe for disaster.
So when you boil it all down, the goal here isn't to find some perfect new system that can't fail. It's really about a fundamental change in your attitude. All this misbehavior of markets, it's here to teach us humility. It demands that we respect risk for what it really is, wild and untamable. And it teaches us to be really, really skeptical of anyone, any model, any expert who comes along promising certainty. And that really leaves us with one last crucial question we have to ask ourselves before we make any move in the market. In a world that is so completely dominated by randomness, the most important question is this. Is the decision I'm about to make based on a real, repeatable pattern, a genuine signal? Or am I just getting swept up in the hurricane of noise? Seriously, just thinking about that one question, that could make all the difference.